So here I am with another amazing guest. This is Melanie Whitney. Everyone's my friend, so she's my dear friend as well. And she's been part of my community. And she's a professor of interpersonal communication and teaches this for a living. How should we communicate better? So I called her here because even though this is a parenting summit, communication is the key. So she's here to give us some tips. She knows the common mistakes we all make when we are communicating. So I cannot wait to learn from her. Welcome, Mel. Welcome to this summit. And I'm so excited that you're going to contribute your wisdom.
Yes. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to dive into this and to see what it evokes, what kind of conversation comes from it.
Okay, teach us how to communicate. We don't know.
Oh, well, the first when you told me let's talk about this, I thought, where do I even begin? Because I spend, an entire semester with my students or weeks with people that I coach. I was like, what can we cover in such a short time? And the first thing that came to mind, which I'm sure everybody here can relate, especially as a parent or in a marriage, is we often evaluate people before we describe anything that we see. So what I mean by that is if you pay close attention to your communication, we're often using evaluative language, so like very judgmental language, and we're not describing in this objective way that we think we are. So for example, an evaluative language would be something like, you don't even care enough to show up on time to the meeting. So I'm assuming that person's behavior of being late was because they didn't care. Right? Or you could say to your kid, that was really rude of you to slam the door, which I'm sure you've heard so many examples of evaluative language being in your line of work.
Or how could you do that? Like, we don't even say what that means, but we're accusing something. So
Always.
Judging and accusing versus what? What is the other one?
Descriptive language.
What would that look like?
So if I'm saying that you don't even care to show up to our meeting on time or to dinner on time, instead, I would say, I noticed, which is going to be the key phrase when we're learning how to use this, because it is difficult in the beginning. We say, I noticed you were late to dinner today. I noticed. I didn't say any judgment about your behavior. I'm just telling you what I saw, like an observer, right? Just observing. I have no stake in this. I'm like a scientist just watching. Or I say, I noticed you slammed the door earlier when you got home.
I noticed you was so disrespectful in front of everyone.
Well, disrespectful is a judgment.
Oh, I did it good. So how would you describe?
So what was disrespectful? What was disrespectful? Like yelling?
You snapped at me. Is that a judgment?
You could say, hey, I noticed that you snapped when I asked you about how your day was. Is everything okay? I noticed
that when I just asked you to put your shoes away, your voice rose 25,000 decibels. You yelled.
Yeah, you can say, I noticed you raised your voice when I asked you to put the shoes away.
Okay, then.
It's hard.
Then. And the kid is like, okay.
Yeah, the kid is like, yeah, I did. Right. Well, it depends, right? It depends what your goal is. But I wanted to address that very specific thing because we're going to build on that as we.
I love it. Yes. It's about building. Yes.
Yes.
Because the key there is that if you evaluate, judge, and condemn and accuse, you've ended the conversation. You've ended any dialogue and now you've made it a fight.
Oh yeah. I'm coming for you. Coming for you. Right. Because when you attack somebody, because it feels like an attack when someone says that I was being disrespectful at the party, I'm going to naturally want to defend myself.
Are you good at this? Just here, I think we should just say this is a whole conversation. The first thing out of my mouth is a judgment.
Oh, I used to always speak like this. And people think because I teach mindfulness and interpersonal communication that I have this perfect like marriage and relationships. You guys, I was the worst at this, the worst. And maybe that's why I went into this line of work, because it was like cathartic, right? I needed this.
If somebody's late all the time, Mel, we can't even say, how come you're late all the time?
Okay, so you can. And this is the thing. So this takes me to another thing.
Yeah.
That it's all about perspective checking. Now, if you're going to be late, let's say we work together and you're late 10 times in a row, I'm gonna have some shit to say, right? I'm gonna have to draw a boundary and hold you accountable because I care about our relationship. But that's not what we're talking about. It's the sentence, the words that we're putting
And
together.
the
That's
tone and the energy. Yeah. Okay.
yes,
Beautiful.
right.
Beautiful.
So when let's say you do want to approach somebody, you want to talk to your kid about why they haven't put their shoes away or why they are slamming doors in the house. This is the next layer I would add on. So we often judge very quickly and we assume we know why people are behaving. In psychology, there's a theory called attribution theory, right? Where we either attribute someone's behavior to something internal, like their character, or external, they got a bad grade, or they, got in a fight with a friend. So that would influence the way they're behaving. So when we want to engage in perspective checking, you can do something. It's very simple. You're basically going to, one, describe, right, what you saw, not evaluate it, because like you said, we shut it down when we do that. And then the next thing we want to do is imagine two possible interpretations for why would my kid slam their door? Are they
What is
feeling
this
upset?
called? What is this called?
This is called perception checking.
Perception checking. So check your own perception
Yes,
with reality.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So I would say, okay, so they slammed the door this morning on the way to school. They usually don't do that. Instead of me sending them a text message, why were you so rude this morning? You didn't even say good morning to me. I could say instead,
Mhm.
hey, honey, I noticed you slammed the door when you left this morning. Did I say something to upset you?
Mhm.
Or is something else going on? Are you okay? So I'm offering at least one or two possibilities, right? Showing them that I'm not attributing their behavior to them being a terrible person, right? Externally.
Mhm.
And then I'm asking for clarification. You're inviting them to the conversation.
Mhm.
And they may say, I'm fine, or I don't want to talk about it. They may shut you down, but at least you did your part.
I love it. I love it. Okay, good. So describe, don't evaluate, which means don't judge, don't accuse. Okay. And then perception checking.
Yeah. So again, those little steps of describing and then those two possible interpretations and then asking for
Mhm.
clarification because you may be wrong.
Mhm.
Both your interpretations may be
Mhm.
completely wrong. But again, it's the part of not judging that's very difficult.
Mhm. Mhm. I love it. Okay, go ahead. What else can we do?
So the other thing that I was thinking of that again, the biggest mistakes is the way we speak to one another as far as responsibility goes. We love to blame. It's
Mhm.
so fun, right? It's so easy to blame. It feels good to blame because then you're not responsible. But
Right.
we have this thing called the language of responsibility, which reveals in these little words, it, but, you, and I, those little words reveal as a speaker, and you're the listener, how much responsibility I'm willing to take in whatever the exchange is, whatever we're talking about. So if I say, Shefali, you make me so mad, I'm projecting, right? So I'm saying, you make me mad, when really I should say, I'm feeling upset
Right. Right.
that you didn't, whatever it is, take
Mhm.
out the trash, that you didn't show up on time, that you didn't follow through on what you said you were going to do. So what we do is we say you when we're especially in conflict. We say you make me so mad or you're such an idiot, right? Instead of taking it back and saying I feel this way. And then there's steps to that as well. But I
Can
mean,
we
you see
say,
it a
I
lot.
feel like you make me mad? Or is that the same thing?
Try it out. Let me know how it goes.
I feel really mad when you is okay.
Yes. Yes. So
I
it's okay.
feel like you make me mad is just the bullshit. Yeah.
It
It's just
is.
I feel, but you. Okay.
Yeah.
So you said it, but you, I.
So when we say something like it's worrisome, let's say your kid comes home after curfew, it's worrying. It is worrying is not taking responsibility for my feelings.
Mm,
I get worried. I get worried, not it's worrying. Again, I'm not taking responsibility here. Or if I say, you're so irresponsible for breaking curfew, right? I'm again blaming. I'm not taking any accountability for how I feel because I'm assuming as a parent, you're going to be angry if your kid is out past curfew. You don't know where they are.
So if your kid just took drugs,
Mhm.
give me a sentence.
What kind of drugs are we talking?
Like cocaine, heroin. Okay. Let's
Okay.
go with the big stuff because you'll be like, for the other stuff.
Mhm.
So let's go with cocaine and heroin. Give me a sentence where I can share my feelings without dumping the blame. How would I
Okay.
do it?
So I'm assuming you just found out they didn't tell you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say you find, I don't know, cocaine, because I need
Yeah.
context. So I say you find cocaine in their room, right?
Okay.
You say, hey, Shefali, I found this in your room. It made me really worried and anxious.
But you just
So,
said it made me worried.
well, yeah, but again, but I'm still sharing how I'm feeling. So
Okay.
you could say it, you just don't want that to be the sentence. It is worrying. You see
Yes,
what I'm
got it.
saying? You
Like
don't
as
just want,
it is a neutral
yeah.
event that would worry everybody.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
don't want to say it, right? So
Yes.
you want to maybe
Yes.
be more specific is what I
Okay.
meant.
It makes me worried. Go
So I
ahead.
got to share how I feel, right? It
Right.
makes me
Right.
worried.
Right.
And then I got to share a possible um consequence. So I described the behavior. I found the cocaine, right? It makes me worried that what? Am I scared that they're going to drop out of school? Am I scared they're going to become an addict? Am I scared? Like, so I have to insert what is the consequence of these feelings and these actions for
Beautiful.
me, not for them, but for me. I know you're not liking this webinar so far.
But it's for me. Okay. Not for them.
So
You can go ahead and have drugs. Like for a parent, it becomes so hard, right?
totally.
For these red flag ones where we are responsible.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, so I understand for another adult, it makes me worried
Yes.
that you are not going to work on time, that you're doing drugs because I feel you lose your job or you become a drug dealer. Okay.
Yeah.
But you can just say it and leave. But with the
No.
parent, we have to take greater responsibility.
Well, and it's, yeah. So then it depends, like, how old is this kid?
Right.
Are they living under your house? Are they paying
Right.
rent? Are they not paying rent?
Right.
Like, there's so many things. And
Right.
what are your boundaries? How far are you willing to take this? Is there a history of addiction in your family? Like, yeah, with drugs, I mean, you took it all the way to
All
the
the way.
extreme, right? But yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. It gets sticky, but at least we can have some tools for how to have that
Yes.
conversation a
I
little
love
more
it.
constructively.
Right. We're not saying this is easy. We're saying
No,
these are ways to keep the dialogue open. Because if you do
exactly.
the other ways of blame, shame, and guilt, I call it blame, shame, guilt, you will shut it down.
Yeah, there's no pathway to connection there.
Yes, yes. And I know I'm being an annoying parent because this is what parents do to me. And you see how
No,
hard
that's
it is?
good. Yeah.
But I'm going
Yeah.
to come onto your side to say, how I tell parents is this is not about solving anything.
Hmm.
This is about opening the channels of communication in a
Yes.
mindful way to keep the juice, to keep the exchange going.
Yeah. If we don't have that bridge of communication, what do you have?
Right,
Nothing.
right,
Nothing.
right.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so but is,
So I mean, you already, I'm
yeah,
sure know this. Whenever we say, let's say we're going, yeah, but kids say this all the time. It's so annoying, especially teenagers, right? But adults say it too to one another. Yeah, but I said this. So it's just become, I think, a habit. But what we can do instead, if you want to replace, yeah, but I hear you, but we want to say
and,
yes, and
yes, yes.
it makes it's, I know it feels uncomfortable, but it is possible for two things to coexist with one another. We can have different experiences, different opinions. They could all exist at the same time.
Right. And then we know you is finger pointing. And
Yes.
what's the I?
So the I is what I was saying of how you want to communicate. They're called I statements.
Yeah,
So language of responsibility, I statements is you describe how you feel,
yeah.
right? You describe the behavior that you noticed, which we already practiced that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you want to talk about a possible consequence,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I get anxious. That would be a feeling. When I don't hear from you all day, that would be the described behavior. I haven't heard from you all day. And it makes me wonder if somebody was in dating, it makes me wonder if you're not interested in me anymore. You're not interested in this relationship. That's the consequence of not hearing from you all day. All right. So it's just 3 steps. And you can even ask for clarification again, if
And
that's
it
something
doesn't
you
mean
want.
that you could still do all this and that person can go, oh, she's
F
blaming me.
off.
Sure, she's blaming me.
Oh, totally. 1,000% they can. You can do all the right things and none of it can matter.
Okay, beautiful. So you're just taking responsibility for yourself. I love it.
Yeah, that's
And
really it.
then, okay, go ahead. Give us more. And then I want to talk about how can we listen better? Like not
Well,
only, yeah.
that's exactly what I want to talk about next is listening. When I think about listening, people say, well, how can I be a more mindful listener? I think that's a big art that we don't know how to do anymore, especially with all the means of how we all have platforms now. We all can jump on the internet and say whatever we want. And culturally speaking, in America, it's like freedom of speech. And so we have so much emphasis on communicating and not listening. And when I think about we're talking to parents here, how can we listen better? It's two things I would be aware of. One thing first is there are very different types of ways to respond in listening. So there's a whole spectrum, and it goes from silent listening, meaning just shutting your mouth and just listening, all the way to it gets more interactive, where you are advising. That's the most interactive and listening you can do, which is unfortunate because many of us jump to that side of the spectrum of analyzing, evaluating, and giving advice.
Opinion.
Yeah, that maybe you didn't even start with the silent listening first. You jumped all the way over here, assuming that this person wants your advice, assuming they want your analysis on the situation. And I think a lot of that has to do, especially in parenting relationships, is you either want control or you want to fix it for your child because maybe they're suffering, maybe they're in pain. Right? So we jump to that side of the spectrum too quickly instead of starting with silent listening, where you just shut up and you just listen, or asking questions to clarify meaning or to understand, or paraphrasing to see if am I listening? Am I hearing you correctly? Maybe you're not. Maybe they correct it for you. You can empathize, where you're really just identifying with them and sitting with them. You can give them support, right? Wow, that must be really difficult. You're in solidarity with them. And then after honestly supporting, that's when you start analyzing, evaluating, and advising. And it becomes less really about mindful and silent listening. So it can get, again, you have to get comfortable with knowing you kind of have to try, right? And your kid or anyone else you're doing this will tell you, they will give you feedback. They'll be like, you're not listening to me. And it's so sad that we're so shitty at listening, because it's one of the most important ingredients for relational satisfaction. So if someone says, I feel like you don't listen to me, that should be like a big siren in your head, because that is going to deteriorate slowly like a cancer, your relationship.
Yeah, I think listening, I mean, we do it for a living because of coaching. We listen for things not said. When somebody's talking to me, I can immediately realize what they missed, right? You must be, and it's so clear. But to listen actively out of a supportive place, not out of a, let me just give you my feedback place, is the key. And with parents, if you truly trust your children, you'll just stay supporting because they'll figure it out. But when we don't trust, we then give advice, opinion, feedback, direction, guidance, conditions. I mean, I've seen parents, I'm like, can you just let them talk? Like, they're just talking. Let them talk.
Do you ever have parents who trust their kid, but they have like a control, like their fear or their anxieties too much?
100%. And half the problems get solved in just listening. Actually, you do, and even before listening is giving trust. So if you give trust, you don't even need to listen much because they've already taken the trust and they're just going to tell you. It's not even like you're listening for they're just going to tell you. But listening is so important. And one thing that I try to do, but I'm not good at it, but with my clients, I'm good, but not in my relationships, is to say just this. What I hear you saying is this, and just repeat it. Just repeat it. Carl Rogers, who was a humanist psychologist, all he did was repeat the damn sentence. And you just kept repeating. So you feel scared. I hear that you're saying that you feel scared. I hear that you felt like your mother didn't come. And he repeats the whole thing, right? Because it just, that soothing, reciprocal mirroring is, you feel so heard, even though he just repeated everything you just said.
Yeah, it makes you feel, like you said, seen, heard, validated.
Yes, such a simple technique, but we don't do it.
No, we don't. And I think it's an impatience also, right? Since you're saying what you're bad at, I know what I am bad at and better now is evaluating and advising. That's where my brain goes because of work, right? And I bring that hat home and my spouse is like, you better knock that shit off. Like all I need for you is and thank God, like we're both very mindful communicators. It's taken a while to get here, but she will just blatantly say, I just need you to listen right now. I'm like, okay.
So if the person doesn't say, another thing parents can do is, do you need me to just listen?
Asking for what? Yes. If you are
unsure, or you
yeah.
want a solution. And I can tell you, most kids will say, just listen.
Yes.
Just listen.
I would bet my money on that. If this was a sport, I would bet my money on that most of the time.
They don't need, because as I said before, listening is, if you give the trust, they kind of know,
Totally.
Every day my kid just tells me, I know, stop repeating yourself, I know. All I hear is I know. And I keep asking her, can you just say okay? And she goes, can you just not keep repeating? Right, so we get into this thing. I'm like, just say okay. And she's like, can you just not keep asking the same thing? I know. So what that means is I am in anxiety, right? It's always us who's in anxiety. And we want the other person to just say something to allay our anxiety.
Yep.
And that's how we get,
you get caught in a spiral.
We're so in a panic already, right? So we start, right? So listening is so powerful. And before we jump in, we have to give trust. I think.
Yeah, the trust is a really good thing to point out, because like you said, if the trust isn't there, it's going to be really hard for you to connect and for them to open up.
Right, we won't be listening, and they know it.
Yeah,
kids they're pretty. Let me tell you how to do it. They sense that, right?
Yes, and it's funny you talk about the about how she's saying, I know, and you're like, can you just say okay? I mean, she's a teenager? No,
20,
in her 20 now, so no longer a teenager. But we forget that, one, their brains aren't fully developed, right? They're not going to be able to give us what we're looking for.
Yes.
And sometimes we behave like our brains aren't fully developed. And another thing I wanted to talk about, and I'll just insert it here because it's a small thing, is meta communication, which is communicating about your communication. So just because you think you are doing the right thing, or you like to speak in this way, maybe your partner or your kid, that doesn't land with them. Like it doesn't work for them. So sometimes we have to figure out together what works, what doesn't work. Like I remember vividly, after work, a long day of 8 to 5 and being in session, it's exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting. So the last thing I want to do is talk to anybody on my drive home, right, from the office. And my spouse, when we used to commute before COVID, she would call me and be like, hey, I want to talk to you. And I noticed for like a couple of weeks that we would always get in a fight when we would talk after work. And about dumb stuff that I can't even remember. It was always just something silly. And then I noticed the pattern and I brought it up to her and I said, hey, have you noticed that every time you call me on the drive home, we end up getting in a fight about something? And she was like, oh yeah, you're right. That has happened kind of often. And I said, this is what I think it is. I'm coming down from work. Like when I'm done with work, it's an on and off button. It's off. But with her, she needed more of a coming down period. So she's still in work mode. She's calling me, wanting to plan her whole life. And like this weekend, this and this is going to happen. And have you stopped at the grocery store? And all these task oriented things. And I was like offline. So we had to teach each other, when is it okay to talk about certain things? When is it not okay? I tend to get really passionate during a conflict. I had to learn to not elevate my voice, to bring my voice and keep it down, right? Or some people get offended by colorful language. by using profanity. They see that as threatening, right? So maybe they don't like that when you communicate and you drop an F-bomb, right? So figuring out what works, what doesn't work, right? And again, you would use I language with your daughter. You could say, when you say, I know, it makes me feel, right? So meta communication, we don't talk about what works and doesn't work for us.
I love it. And timing is like across the board standard. You have to stage it, especially if it's conflict.
Totally.
I never talk to my daughter if she's hungry, which is all the time, right? So I wait till she's got food in front of her. Right? You have to wait. You cannot, like you said, you are working all day and then you have an off switch. Our kids are at school all day, taking commands. Then they come home and then the next commander is here. Then we're angry with them within 2 seconds because they're not listening to us, but they've been listening all day. So we don't have any compassion sometimes for the timing. And everybody's rhythm is different. So we have to honor our children or our partners. When are they in a state of receptivity? As soon as they come home, that is like the worst time for everybody, really, to dump more crap on them, so be mindful of that. When is your kid going to be the most receptive? When is their calm time? Have you connected first before you command and correct? All that stuff. But okay, good. I love this.
Well, since we're talking about the timing, because that is so crucial when it comes to anything communication wise, is another thing I think we overlook is our channel of communication. And what I mean by channel is choosing the right channel, choosing how you're going to get your message across. Is it an email? Is it a text message? Is it a phone call? Is it a video call? Is it a Zoom? Is it face-to-face? Is it a handwritten note? Those are all channels that we have available to us to communicate with one another. And they are not all created equally.
No,
they are not.
And some people do better with one. I text my daughter. She's amazing at texting, but she will not stand to talk about it.
There you
So
go.
you have to figure out how, she's a just recent teenager. So you'd figure out what works for your kid.
Exactly. And we tend to be, especially as, there's a hierarchy oftentimes with the parent-child relationship and family dynamics. And so you feel like I'm going to choose a channel and that's the way it is. And like, good luck with that. That's not going to work.
Right.
So like you said, understanding what channel maybe your kid responds best to, your spouse responds best to. And if that's a channel that makes you uncomfortable, let's say it's texting, but you prefer to call them. Okay, well, let's explore that. What is it about texting that makes you uncomfortable? Is it just because the buttons are little? Well, use the voice, the voice feature. So what is it that makes you uncomfortable? And it's vice versa. Like a lot of my students who are young, who are in their first few years of college, they struggle to approach me after class and to just ask me a question. They would rather wait till later and email me the question. When I'm like, I could have answered that to you in 2 seconds, right? So I have to have empathy that they struggle with that channel. So it's really about understanding, and there are pluses and minuses. Sometimes the text message, it's what we call asynchronous. It's not in real time. It gives you an opportunity to choose the right language, to put thought into what you're saying, if it's a delicate matter. Because I'm sure we're all guilty of saying something and putting our foot in our mouth and being like, damn it, I shouldn't have said that.
And also to know the trigger words,
Yes.
Like one day I said something to my daughter, I can't remember the word I used. Oh, I said the worst thing. One of the worst things you can say is you're just overreacting. Oh, she overreacted even more.
She's like, I'll show you
what an overreactor looks like. You calling me an overreactor? I was like, yes. But it's so, that's something we parents do. And even in a relationship, like the other person is crying and we're like, why are you crying? Because their feelings are hurt. Or if they're overreacting, why are you overreacting? Then it makes it worse.
Yeah. Or calm down.
It makes the person feel so ashamed and,
totally.
Judged. But that's connected to that judging piece. But knowing the trigger words of the other person,
Yeah. You bring up a good the good point about words. Words have what we say, I'm going to just like get a little nerdy. They have two different types of meaning. So one, we have denotative, which is like the dictionary, right? What literally the meaning is. But then you have connotative, which is the more emotional, personal experience that I have with that word. Let's say as a kid, I grew up and I got made fun of for being sensitive, right? I got teased for being sensitive. And then you and I are having a conversation and you say, hey, Mel, I noticed you're really sensitive to other people's behaviors. And you mean it as a compliment, like, wow, you're so observant and you notice all these things. Wow. And I'm like, F you, you called me sensitive. And I have this negative reaction, right? So words lie, what we always say is words lie in people, not in words. So the meaning of words lies in people, not in the definition of it. So we have to be very mindful. If I say, I don't like when you call me sensitive, I don't like when you tell me to calm down, right? Maybe my previous marriage, they told me to calm down and it's a trigger for me.
100%. I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. My goodness, you must be a master by now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, up here I am, but sometimes things still fly out of there and I'm like, oh, give it back.
Are you mindful though of your tone, your words?
I am. I used to be very mindless of them, but I do a lot better job. And honestly, the biggest feat for me was knowing when to stop ahead, right? When I feel it escalating, because your body gives you clues. And when I feel my heart rate starting to go up or my chest start to tighten, I know I need a timeout or I'm going to say something that's not nice. And so I'll tell my spouse, I'll be like, okay, I'm reaching my capacity. I need a minute because if we keep doing this, I am going to say something very mean. And I'll just tell her like, and then if it happens, well, I'm like, I warned you.
I love it. Love it.
It's tough.
Okay. What else in your closing do you have to tell us? Because this is fascinating.
I would say in closing, probably the last thing that we could cover since we are focusing on, relationships is the difference between confirming and disconfirming language or messages. So confirming messages are things that show our children or our loved ones that we value them, that they care. And disconfirming language shows them that what they say or do doesn't matter, right? So that we don't value them. And there are such little phrases that we say every day that are very disconfirming and so hurtful to these relationships, especially because we have to remember these are kids. They're still forming their sense of identity, their self-worth, like they're not established, right? So we have a lot of influence in how we communicate, and they're paying attention to how we communicate with them because what we say and don't say, like, sends a message. So there's a lot of, I see parents and I mean, this happens with everybody, but especially in parent-child relationships, a sense of superiority and a sense of certainty. So we exhibit this sense of superiority. Like when you're a parent one day, you'll understand, what it is. When you have your own mortgage, you'll understand blah, 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 blah. So that when you do that sense of superiority or certainty, like saying things like, well, that will never work, we shut it down. You are shutting it down. You're telling them what they say, what their opinion is, doesn't matter. Even if like I always think about this example when my niece was like 5 years old going on 15. She was one of those kids and we were baking and she wanted to put something in the cupcakes that I knew would make the cupcakes not rise. I was like flustered and I think we were on a time crunch and I was like, that will never work. And I just like kind of snapped. And her being sassy 5-year-old was like, bye. She dropped her little cupcake tray and just left the kitchen. So she was so upset. And I thought, okay, I could have at least let her do it to one cupcake, right? I could have said, honey, I've tried that before.
You do have.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So we're not creative in the moment.
No, we're not. Yeah. We're not. So I had to take a minute and I went back to her and I said, hey, I'm sorry for what I said. So I took accountability, right, for my actions, because they see that when you apologize, when you show your imperfection, gives them permission to do the same, right? So I told her what I said, Auntie Mel has done that before and it didn't work, but maybe the way you do it will work. So how about we try it with this one? And she was like pouty, but like, fine, and she did it and it didn't work. And she got to see that and she got to experience that in her own, but I got to champion and support her in that experience instead of telling her, I'm older than you, I know better. And it shut her little soul down. So I think really being mindful of our messaging and asking yourself, is this confirming or disconfirming the other person? Is it going to bring us closer, or am I exerting power over them? I think is really, really important.
I know. And I tell parents, but I've made so many mistakes. When my daughter was more in her younger teens and wanted to have a party and have some alcohol and have some this, and I immediately would go to, it won't work. The police will come. We'll all go to jail. I'll lose my license. This is the end of life. The earth will shut down, right? Like you went, it won't work. Who cares? It's a cupcake, right?
Exactly.
But for me, I mean, it was some concern, which was real life, but
Totally.
nothing ever went wrong. And they didn't even drink much. It was nothing but our anxiety, because we foretell and we go to the future, and then we don't create a partnership.
No.
And what's more important is that partnership. When the kid sees you're willing to try, right? So then I change and I would tell my daughter, I'm really nervous because all I see is gloom and doom. So help me out.
There you go.
And then she would be like, okay, we'll just do it for 10 minutes and just a little bit. And, so I'm validating her experience to be a rebellious teenager and my experience to be a concerned mom who doesn't want to serve substances. So, but in the moment, it's our anxiety jacks up and it shuts down possibility.
Totally. And we got to own that, right? That's huge. It's a huge part of building trust is accountability. And if you're not willing to take accountability, you're giving permission to whoever's in relationship with you to do the same. So I think about accountability as like if I don't take it, it's a poison, right? It's a debt in the relationship. It's going to show up as shame or guilt later. So why not deal with it now, where it can be a contribution, where it can add to the relationship, instead of, destroying it later.
I love it, the debt and credit, so I tell parents, just connect first. Just know that's your mantra. You can yell later, you can, punish later if you want to, but first connect. I see this is hard. I see you're struggling. I get it. You didn't mean to do it. Give benefit of doubt. Create the bond. And then in that conversation, you won't even feel like yelling later, right? So just force yourself to get into credit gear, because debit is just going to keep, spiraling out of control. Credit builds closeness. And so I ask parents, what do you want to build here? Yes, you can punish them. That's always your option. But can we build something together, right? First. And these are such valuable moments to pivot towards connection. And then you can yell later, but yelling, we don't realize, just shuts it all down, man. And it doesn't take more than, by the time your kid is 4 or 5, they know.
They learn fast.
They learn fast.
I'm learning that with my nephew right now. He's 2 years old.
So fast. And it's so sad. It's not fair to us parents, because we don't know what we're doing at that, especially if we're young parents. We're like, how did this guy already learn to not trust me?
It's a messed up little exchange there.
It's a messed up exchange, because you're
really
young
is.
and dumb, and they're just impressionable, but they're creating their whole foundation.
I know.
And you don't realize, you're like, I just yelled 2 times and now the kid is like terrified of me. What? Right? It's a delicate thing. But that's why, mindfulness is the key,
And that's why, honestly, that's why I got into what I'm doing, because when I had been teaching at the university for over 10 years, and I was like, why is there only this one paragraph in this one chapter about self-awareness?
I know.
I was like, this doesn't make sense. And that's why I was like, mindfulness is the key to all of this. Yeah. So that's where we all need to always, I think, go back to.
Yeah. Self-awareness. Every time a girl or boy comes to me and says they want to date, I go, you cannot date, to marry, like they're looking for, I said girl or boy, but a woman or man. And I go, the key is self-awareness. How self-aware are they? Not just going to therapy and dumping, but true self-awareness. is not just something you think about, it's something you have to apply all day long.
Yeah.
And when the person has self-awareness, now you're on the road to true connection. But without self-awareness, and I didn't know that was an ingredient, when I was younger. Did you?
Younger, no, but I would say I started learning that into my like late 20s. I was like, oh, this is because I saw it in
Right.
my students that it was lacking. Well, how can I send them into the world with all these tools, but then they can't check in with themselves?
Yeah. I when I was 21, I began meditating, but I just thought if I'm self-aware, it's okay. But I realized that it's really not. You have to choose a partner that is self-aware.
Yeah, or else it's lopsided. What good is you being all self-aware and your partner is so oblivious? I'm not saying it doesn't, people make it work. I've seen it, but it's just
a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
Both have to be self-aware, but really self-aware.
Yeah.
And I try to do that in my marriage. Like, I'll be the one, but eventually you get burnt out, So self-awareness is the key.
Yes.
And we need to help our children by not blaming, shaming, and guilting them. That's the key, so that at least they have the self-worth to become self-aware. Because if not, then half their life is spent just undoing the blame, shame, and guilt.
Yep.
As we see in all our clients, So, Mel, where can people find you? And
people can find me. They can go to my website at www.melaniewhitney.com. They can go to my Instagram. They could get my podcast. I mean, there's all.
What's your Instagram?
Same thing, just my name, Melanie Whitney.
And what's your podcast called?
It is called Mindless to Mindful, and it's short form. It's like episodes are usually about 10 minutes, so you can squeeze it into your busy day. And I just give very tools like we did today that you can start right after the episode.
I love it. Okay, Mindless to Mindful, Melanie Whitney. And I'm so grateful you came and gave us. I have so many notes that I'm going to put in the end slide. So thank you for joining us. And please check her out if you want to learn better skills. Go to Melanie. Thanks, Mel. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.